Now we are going to move on to a conversation between Caroline Gabriel from Analysys Mason and Rabih Dabboussi, who is SVP Global Head of Sales and Marketing at Rakuten. And the question is Open RAN too expensive, too risky, and too long a transition for all but tier one operators? Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Annie. And thank you for inviting us to take part in the conference. It's been great so far. As Annie said, I'm Caroline Gabriel. I'm a research director at Analysys Mason. I'm in charge of our networks practice with a particular focus on 5G business models. And like most telecom analysts, who have focused on 5G, I've been following Rakuten Mobile with a great deal of interest and fascination, really, over the recent years. So I'm really delighted to be having this conversation today with Rabih, who heads up global sales and marketing at Rakuten. We'll keep this conversational. We're not going to present slides. I'll sort of lead the conversation with a few questions, if that's all right, Rabih, but we'll keep it free flowing. But before we start, would you like to just say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, of course. I just want to highlight the fact that I'm probably not new to many of the attendees here. I don't see who's attending, but I assume many have met with me in either my current role or my previous role. So I started out in the mid-90s at Cisco, and I was responsible for developing the next generation products for mobile networks, starting with the GGSN, SGSN, PDSN for CDMA networks, all of the SIGTRAN products that were introduced later on, transitioning SS7 onto IP, participated in many network architecture and deployments around the world, whether in my R&D role or later on in my business and sales responsibility across the emerging markets. So I come with a deep technical background and a thorough understanding of 2G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G. So looking forward to the discussion with you, Caroline, and to the Q&A that comes afterwards.
Great. Thanks, Rabih. As Annie said, we're sort of focusing today on perhaps what are some of the challenges or the barriers for operators to emulate what Rakuten has done, which has been very groundbreaking. As we know, I'm sure the audience are very familiar with the fact that you've deployed an end-to-end cloud-native 4G, 5G network in an extremely challenging market, Japan, where it's very competitive. And all the operators there, I would say, technically advanced. So this has been ambitious. Before we come on to some of perhaps the challenges and the lessons that others could learn, can you just give us a little progress update? I saw some good results a few days ago that came out of a benchmark by Umlaut, which were interesting. So do you want to give us the good news before we talk about some of the challenges along the way?
Sure. Let me start by just describing our journey for those who are not familiar with us. So Rakuten Mobile journey started out in 2018. After being an MVNO in the country for a little over 2 years, we made a conscious decision to move into a full-fledged MNO, secured both LTE and 5G licenses in varying spectrums. In the low band, we had spectrum in the 800 megahertz for LTE. Sub-6 in 5G, as well as millimeter wave. We started the rollout of the network towards the latter part of 2018, early 2019. Launched our commercial services in April of 2020 for LTE, and then again in September of 2020 for 5G. So both 4G and 5G were launched commercially in the same year. What I would describe as one of the most challenging years in modern history. That speaks to the level of automation and digitization that we've put in place. The early signs of the network performance, we're not done with the network rollout, by the way. We were given the target to reach 90% coverage of the Japanese population by 2027. I'm happy to share with you that by the end of this year, we will be over 96% coverage of the Japanese population. So somewhere around 5.5 to 6 years ahead of schedule. And I'd like to share a little bit of data here. On a weekly basis, we activate anywhere between 1,300 and 1,500 cell sites. On a daily basis, we have 130 to 150 new sites on air. Unheard of in the industry, and obviously that is just an example of the outcome you would get when you have a cloud native Open RAN based network where your hardware deployment is limited, your footprint at the cell site is reduced significantly, and the level of automation that you can do across the domains from the OSS layer down to core all the way to access or radio access network is just completely different in this paradigm shift of the architecture that we used. The early signs of the performance of the network have been quite encouraging. And I'd be the first to be the devil's advocate of all of the either FUD or accurate concerns and challenges that have been raised in the industry, whether they're security or performance or coverage or feature parity, availability of radio units and antennas, availability of the breadth of the spectrum that is needed, especially on the reuse of lower bands from LTE for 5G, NR, and so on. But the early audits have been quite encouraging. We've had numerous iterations of OpenSignal that has been published in the last 2 to 3 quarters. But just recently, Umlaut, which is one of the leaders in this space, did a benchmark and an audit exercise in Japan specifically on Rakuten's 4G network, the LTE network. With the objective to have a first conclusive assessment of a cloud-native Open RAN-based network that is completely new, considered to be the world's first to be a nationwide network based on Open RAN. And the results are quite good. So let me share a little bit of data here. The, the scope of the audit focuses on 3 very important areas. And they all are measured from a user experience point of view. So the UET, or the user equipment test, is really nothing more than just a mobile device with the right SDK, with the right data collection and telemetry that help assess on a score of 1,000. And that is a very interesting methodology that Umlaut has put in place. And by the way, they do this globally for every network and every market. So they've conducted the same audit using the same measurements and the same principles on 3 key areas of the network. The first one is coverage, second one is speed, and third is latency. And I'm really pleased to say here that comparing us to such mature, optimized, hardened, densified networks of Atlanta, Berlin, Johannesburg, London, Mexico City, Milan, New York, Riyadh, Rome, Sao Paulo, Seattle, Sydney, and Zurich, this is the list that we were benchmarked against. I'm really happy to say that the overall score of 926 out of 1,000 is quite encouraging. It's a very good sign by a third-party neutral entity who has done the audit for anybody who's considering Open RAN, who's considering a unified cloud architecture, to consider seriously and see the value and the benefits of that in a network that is already working, not completely deployed, but still working. So having that score, the overall score is quite encouraging in the top percentile of these cities. The second is our comparison of speed. So we ranked right second to the highest at 331 out of the bunch, where Atlanta ranked at 332. So we feel very proud of that score on coverage. On speed, we were the highest among all of these cities at 376 versus the nearest highest of 366. And last but not least, on latency, which we believe there's an explanation behind it, but we are right in the benchmark of about the 70th to 80th percentile, which is still good at 213 points in that latency category. So the 3 together comprise the overall score, which is 926. We believe this is a very important audit, very interesting audit for everyone to go through and see the first and the early signs of network performance that is built based on cloud architecture and Open RAN throughout the access network.
I think I agree, Rabih. I think results like that are really interesting, and they're very important for building confidence among the operator community, because we have to remember that for operators, particularly those that have been operating conventional networks for a long time, this is a massive disruption. It's not just a technology change, it's a change to your processes, the skills you need, how your structures are, and so on. So I think we can see that there are some benefits to being greenfield, although clearly some challenges as well, because you're coming into a market as a new entrant in the mobile market. But I think on that point, I think executives like you and Tarek have been perhaps unusually transparent about the difficulties of getting this network to the stage that it's now at, and that you haven't pretended that it was an easy thing. But I think particularly smaller operators, tier 2 operators, will be looking and thinking, well, if Rakuten found it challenging, it's going to be awful for us, because we don't have that kind of engineering resource, we don't have that kind of ecosystem sort of control. So I wonder what you'd say. What did you find were the biggest challenges, and what could you sort of offer smaller operators by way of your learnings that perhaps they could lower the barriers, make it a little bit easier for them than perhaps it was for you?
It's definitely a good question, Caroline, but allow me to give a little bit of a background here. So obviously, when we started in exploring the potential for us to build our network based on a unified end-to-end cloud and leveraging Open RAN and Open RAN only across our radio network, in 2018, as you can imagine, and as everybody can obviously see and is aware of, 2018, the maturity of the industry, both in the availability of technologies, the virtualization and containerization of network functions, and most importantly, the maturity of the Open RAN standard and forums, we're not where they are today. We are in, I would say here, and this is important, I want to mention this because everybody should be fully aware that we are now in 2021. The maturity, the breadth of the technology availabilities, both from the antennas and radio units all the way back to the network functions, is at a completely different level. And the alignment around the standards for Open RAN have matured significantly. So I'd say we are currently in a much better shape for others to cross that chasm. We crossed that chasm out of need and out of a very bold and strategic decision we made in 2018, which is we will explore a viable alternative that was not done before. We were the guinea pig in the industry for exploring, but we made a very conscious decision and felt very confident in this journey that we've taken. Also anticipating the challenges that we will face. So I just want to make sure that we clarify that point. And every journey, whether it's a greenfield network or a brownfield network, every journey in technology refresh and rolling out of new coverage areas and markets, or introducing new services, acquiring new customers, every journey is tough and complex and difficult. There is no such thing as easy journey for any of us in the telco world. We've chosen this path early on in our career, and we are doomed for the rest of life. But it's quite rewarding, because if it was easy, there'd be a lot more people working on this stuff. So the first and most important challenges for us were to define the architectural principles for us, the strategic principles that help us achieve our objectives. The first one is complete disaggregation between hardware and software in the radio access network. So we've really we fragmented the architecture, where we set architectural principles for us on the radio side, where every radio component, every radio unit need to comply and interoperate and connect with our Open RAN stack, which is a software stack based on a virtualized or containerized function that is sitting on top of COTS hardware. So that was the first innovative and challenging principle, because when you move from a unified monolithic system of radio unit and baseband deployed at the cell site coming from the same vendor to a multi-vendor heterogeneous network that has more than 5 or 6 different radio unit types from different radio vendors, terminating those onto a common ORAN architecture and ORAN stack, that wasn't easy. Let alone the fact that you're deploying that ORAN stack on top of x86 based processors and compute systems, where the right sizing, dimensioning, the right development that is needed at the kernel level, because we are now talking about mission critical protocols such as the timing, the syncing, the CRC checks, all of the low-level PHY and mid-PHY that takes place between the actual VDU of an ORAN stack and the radio unit. That is quite unique and quite challenging. And I'm happy to say that we've mastered the art of tuning the hardware and compute system to the operating system in cloud, containerized Kubernetes-based cloud, all the way up to the software stack that is the first beneficiary of that compute system. So managing the right physical cores within the processor to allocating them to the right CNF. These are not easy challenges to have. A misnomer in the Open RAN environment is that you can take an Open RAN software and just put it on a server that you buy off the shelf. That is really not where the industry is right now. There's a lot of development that has taken place for us, at least over the last 2.5 years, to get us to where we are. The other challenge that wasn't unique to us, I think that's a challenge that applies across and still exists to a certain degree, is the breadth of availability of radio units complying with Open RAN and supporting all of the different bands that are needed in either both LTE and 5G. So that continues to be an industry challenge. I speak to operators every day and every week all over the world. And our biggest challenge right now together is to try and find them the right solution when it comes to the radio unit supporting Open RAN. The last but not least of these strategic foundations was complete adoption of a unified cloud. So we made a very conscious decision early on that we will not build multiple clouds, what I call the phenomenon of clouds. That is a very risky architectural decision. And I know a lot of operators today may feel comfortable with their cloud strategy and cloud approach. But when you start looking under the hood, you realize there is a cloud stack for core functions, cloud stack for IMS functions, maybe another cloud stack for the ORAN functions that they are trialing or testing or doing a limited deployment on. The end result is you have a multi-cloud in your private environment, and you have to do cross-domain and cross-cloud workload orchestration, workload automation. And that is a big, big challenge. So we made a conscious decision to have a unified cloud. We standardized on a single operating system, on a single cloud orchestration, and on a single type of hardware that serves us. Because at the end of the day, that automation and orchestration has to cut across the domains horizontally, but also across the technology stack vertically. So that's another kind of, in our architectural principles, we feel very strongly about that approach. Last but not least is about the people. We could not achieve what we've achieved by following what we have been doing in the industry for the last 3 decades. We believe that in order for us to achieve our goal is about building an organization that has already shifted their mind, shifted their thinking about the new approach that we're putting in place, making sure that the knowledge of cloud and the knowledge of telco is married together in our organization. The understanding of software is paramount, but the linking of that understanding of cloud and virtualization to the key principles of a telco network architecture. And mixing the two together is important. And also breaking the barriers between the silos. For example, our IT functions and IT workloads coexist with our network function, network workloads deployed on a unified cloud, the same exact cloud, operated and managed by the same team, I must say.
That's fascinating, Rabih. I think these sort of comments are, in our experience, I spend most of my life talking to operators of all different sizes and types, and particularly, as I said, the slightly smaller ones are the ones who perhaps are the most nervous. I think these are the kind of insights that help them, and particularly the sense that a lot of these early challenges are being addressed collectively, that there are more standardized, more platform-based approaches that are sort of packaging up some of the learnings of companies that moved quickly, that moved early, like Rakuten and a few others that have done the same. So I think that's a note of encouragement. I know our time's a little short, so Annie, are we all right to do some Q&A, or I don't want to derail your schedule? We could talk about this all day, I know. I think you're on mute.
Okay, my unmute button was are you happy to take the questions? Can you see the questions that have come up? Or should I just do it? Is that easier than?
Yeah, possibly. Is that all right?
All right then. Well, thanks. That was interesting. And you're right, we could do this all day. One question is, what were the key factors that drove the decision to go full RAN, which I suspect means full Open RAN, I guess?
Yeah, very good question. And I'll just summarize it in a very simple terms for whoever asked that question, which is quite important. First and foremost, I mean, we were building a new network. Obviously, when you set out to build a greenfield environment, you want to do something that is future proven. We've seen the transition towards cloud in the enterprise and consumer market, and we've seen the transition happening over the last 5 to 7 years towards virtualization, at least in some of the core functions and core workloads. And we were fully aware of the benefits of having a disaggregated radio access network where you can leverage innovations, reduce your cost, and drive a competitive ecosystem in your suppliers, and really lean on some of those hungry ones to develop for you the right radio units and the right architecture to help you achieve a competitive edge in your market. So that was the first. The second one is definitely OpEx and CapEx reduction. As you move towards less proprietary systems, more open interfaces, you'd be able to leverage the commoditized infrastructure. Most importantly is your x86 COTS platforms, but it's not limited to that. And last but not least, and very importantly, is our very, very strong belief in the fact that for the last 2.5 decades, operators have invested the bulk majority of their resources and their energy in keeping the network up and keeping the lights up. We did not want to fall into that trap. To give you an example, our network, if it was deployed and architected in the traditional sense of things, we would need a few thousand people in our operations centers. Today, we operate the network with less than 200 people, less than 200 people. And the level of automation and orchestration that takes place, given that you've already adopted the unified cloud, you've opened up the interfaces, everything is deployed as a CNF or a VNF in your network, digitize the processes significantly. That was the third and very important pillar that helped us make the decision. At the end of the day, it gave us the ability to enter the market at 30% of the ARPU benchmark in the country, and allowed us to compete further in enabling the users to have unique experiences at much lower cost that were not available for them in Japan.
Okay, and another of our attendees asks, do you think building a new cloud native network is easier than transforming an old one or an existing one?
Well, transforming a legacy infrastructure into cloud is going to be challenging, but they can. This is a very good question. They can coexist. So look, I've worked throughout my career with operators. I haven't met every operator in the world, 1,400 plus, but I've met hundreds. And I've done projects and rollouts of 2G, 2.5G, 3G, 4G, and now 5G, from Chile to Japan and from Canada to New Zealand and everything in between. The challenges repeat themselves. In the early on of technology adoption, you have to be bold, you have to decide and strategize around when you decide to cross that chasm. I believe it is time for many brownfield operators to start considering crossing that chasm towards more adoption of cloud nativeness, more adoption of Open RAN. We're a proof point in the industry right now that Open RAN works across a nationwide deployment. It can coexist in a brownfield environment, even though ours is not brownfield, but we do have the know-how to help you navigate through the challenges of integrating the benefits of cloud and Open RAN into your environment. And that's a business that we are aspiring to continue to drive globally. And nonetheless, the shift in the operating model, the shift in the organizational structure, that's an evolution for most brownfield operators. That cannot be just a switch overnight that turns them from a legacy brownfield environment into a next generation kind of cloud native environment. So there is a way to do it. It's not easy, like I said, but it's not impossible. And again, we're a perfect example of why it works. Now, one more thing I'd like to add, Annie, is there's a lot of misconception, and I'd like to demystify some of the ideas and opinions here. Japan is not just a dense urban area. Tokyo, yes, has a certain level of density that supersedes any other city on this planet. If you take the center of Tokyo, Shibuya, for example, 1 square kilometer has a population of 16,400 people. That is the highest density of any city around the world. And Open RAN works there. But if you take a trip to Hokkaido up in the North Island, there's rarely anybody there. So you could walk for days and days and not see anyone. So that's a complete extreme of the rural area. Open RAN works there. And I really want to demystify the comments in the industry right now, probably from lack of understanding or experience, that Open RAN doesn't work in dense areas, Open RAN doesn't work in rural areas. It is working in both, and we would be more than happy to share metrics and performance KPIs with anybody who's interested to explore further with us.
We have to stop there because we're already overrun. But thank you so much. And there are a couple of questions in the Q&A channel that if you'd like to follow up, that's up to you. And I'm sorry to the questioners that we didn't get to.
We will capture those and follow up. I have to drop off, unfortunately, but
okay.
I'll ask my team to capture them. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much, and Caroline too. So great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.